If we want to progress further down the road of a child or understand where the school is getting its material from, who are the providers for the school, what is going to be this higher education, then we'd want to look at academia.
A cult that is recruiting some of America's best and brightest young people. This cult has centers in every major city and many small towns, and it keeps its victims for years. Those who get caught in its clutches end up coming out years later unemployed, deeply in debt, sometimes even homeless, and physically and mentally battered. What am I talking about? I'm talking about universities. Universities that dangle the dream of advanced degrees in front of smart and talented people with the promise of illustrious and secure careers in academia at the end of it. They extract years of effort, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in payment, only to eject those masters and PhDs at the end with job prospects, self-esteem, sometimes even physical health, and certainly credit rating virtually shattered. How do I know this? Because I myself am an escapee from the university cult. I'm a former tenured professor and department head at a Big Ten institution, and I'm sharing what I saw as a PhD student, a faculty member, department head, and then as someone who left 10 years ago to start a business called The Professor Is In.
Perhaps as above, so below, we can see the problems in academia and colleges and universities, not just regular elementary or intermediate or middle schools, for instance. But she does mention something that she feels the need to clarify for, which I think is rather important.
When I say universities indoctrinate smart students into a cult, I don't mean the Fox News claim that so-called leftist professors are imposing Marxism, feminism, and Black Lives Matter on our vulnerable youth. No. What I mean is the professors are selling the lie that pursuing an advanced degree will lead to a prestigious and secure academic career.
And professors could be pushing all sorts of fanaticism or cult-like behavior onto their students, but she's actually saying it's in the nature of the system.
Right now, only 2 to 7% of people entering PhD programs will go on to get a secure tenure track or tenured position. And yet almost every one of them goes into these programs believing they're going to be the exception. And they are allowed to believe that by their faculty members and their advisors. This information is not secret. It's shared in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the New York Times. It's everywhere. But professors don't tell the truth about it. Instead, they like to engage in arcane arguments about should this be called an undersupply of jobs or an oversupply of PhDs. But the stakes are very high. 25% of adjuncts are paid so poorly they qualify for food stamps and welfare. And all of this is funded by catastrophic debt. Grad students only constitute 15% of students, but make up 40% of debt. Grad school debt is the fastest growing debt, and 25% borrow more than $100,000. And full funding is no protection. These quote-unquote full funding packages that departments offer, especially in the humanities and social sciences, they don't cover actual costs. They are not pegged to actual cost of living. So even students with full funding packages still have to take out loans to make ends meet.
And this knowledge may not apply to you. You may say, I'm not in college. I may not have students or kids in college. But the problem is that this is the foundation to our world, just like the school system as a whole. So we have to look at it if we're studying the nature of cults, as again, the actions, the behaviors, the mindsets that take place within these systems could contribute to other systems, other cult-like phenomena. It's also important to note that even if some of the statistics and the things that she is mentioning is current and it changes, we have to notice the cult-like behavior. Why do people comply? Why are people willing to lie? These are the deeper questions we must ask if we're going to look at the patterns across multiple different types of cults.
They're flattered and groomed by their undergraduate professors, for whom the absolute highest praise is, you are so smart, you should go to graduate school. And so starry-eyed and filled with hero worship, young students believe them. And why wouldn't they? So they go on into PhD programs like lambs to the slaughter. And then, once in those programs, they're encompassed in groupthink, which ties identity to academic achievement. Only academic accomplishments are legitimate. Everything else is a failure. And in fact, prioritizing financial compensation or job security is a betrayal of the religious ideology. And those who leave or try to do something else are shamed. Your very identity, your sense of self is tied up with academic accomplishment exclusively. So students enter their programs, but they're programs of gaslighting and delusion. And suffering and poverty is not a sign of failure, but a sign of moral righteousness. Self-sacrifice is good. Martyrdom is even better. The most famous case, of course, is the catastrophic case of Margaret Mary Voyko, an 83-year-old adjunct in the field of French, who in 1983 died of a heart attack on her lawn after being abruptly let go by Duquesne University, ironically a Catholic university in Pittsburgh, after 25 years of adjuncting. She said teaching is not a profession or a career, it's a devotion, a dedication. It should not be looked on as a job or a source of income. She died destitute. Just last year, someone said to me, Karen, good teachers give to their students till it hurts. Good teachers don't look at the clock or the bottom line. Adjuncts take miserably low wages because they love their students, unquote. So this way of thinking is alive and well at the present day.
Well, it's good to hear that teachers may not care so much about money. In fact, I would also want a doctor to care more about healing me than making money. But she makes a point that is, I think, quite valid, which is that they should also be paid in response to the great deeds that they're doing or the great work that they're doing, and it actually provides more incentive to do better. But what we see is that good is preyed on. That people who are trusting, people who care, are often not going to question the things that are happening to them because it's much harder to resist. It's much harder to be the outlier. So it takes someone speaking out against a system, someone who may have left that system, to do it. We need to balance work and love, work and play. These things may need to be integrated.
Do what you love is the most perfect ideological tool of capitalism. When you do what you love, it hides the fact that if we acknowledged all of our work as work, we would set appropriate limits for it, demanding fair compensation and humane schedules, as Mia Tokumitsu said in her book about the do what you love phenomenon. So martyrdom, in fact, proves your purity. And the greatest victims, those who are the most in debt with the least job security, for them, the delusion of spiritual superiority is really the only thing left to cling to. Now, how do I know that? Because when I left my academic job to start The Professor Is In, my business, coaching grad students and faculty in employability and how to move on and do in their careers, well, I was called many things, but most of all, I was called a grifter. Because to apply careerist thinking to the Holy Mother Church of academia could only be a lie, a cheat, and a con. As an adjunct said about me just a few months ago, I do think my adjunct job is morally superior to Kelsky's. So consequently, for anyone who tries to leave, it does feel like being cast out in deep space, all alone, rejected by everyone. But it should be clear by now, it's academia that's the grift.
So we need to set appropriate limits or boundaries, because if we don't set our boundaries, then people will take advantage of us. People will do things that is wrong to us, and we will let them. And we also don't want to become fanatical, where we say we have it all figured out and we know this one way is the best way. We have this sort of moral superiority and we say, yeah, I am going to keep doing what I'm doing because it is better, even though it's still degrading me. But they were taught that it's good or for the greater good or for some spiritual purpose, so that way they should suppress the reality of what is happening here and now.
Academia is a cult. The first cultish aspect of academia is the fact that students often become very socially isolated. Cults like to keep people in their bubble, and academia does that surprisingly well. And I found this paper, which is Coping with Loneliness, a netographic study of doctoral students. And essentially it's saying that loneliness and isolation is kind of like one of the main issues with doing a PhD. Academia seems to reward people who put aside everything else and work solely in academia on their project. If you leave, it is seen as a betrayal to your career and all of the effort you've put in to get where you are. And a lot of times it is luck, it is circumstance, it is a huge dose of who you know. Those are the deciding factors of whether or not someone is successful in academia. But if you leave, it is very, very bad, and you are a failure. That you cannot go against academia in terms of its current standing. If you try to sort of like inject new ideas, that they're very sort of like standoffish and they will not accept your ideas. But ultimately, this is just a feature of academia. It is not cultish, in my opinion. Essentially, if you have this whole body of information that sort of agrees about a certain thing, if you come up with a new idea and you want to inject it into this bubble of knowledge, you need extraordinary evidence. There is a science communicator, a famous one called Carl Sagan, who says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that's the little acronym there. Essentially, if you come up with something new, you need to convince people that this is real. That's just sort of like part of the academic game. Now, if you provide enough evidence and it's compelling enough, people will change their minds. I've seen it myself.
It's a hard reality to face reality, and having to explain reality beyond illusion, beyond the utopian dream. He mentions that if you provide extraordinary evidence, then it can create a change in the universities or the academia, and that they will listen. But there is a problem with this, is that there could actually be coercion involved, and it can come from different forms you may not expect. There could be censorship, for instance. You see it all over the internet, where there's certain information being shared, but people don't know that information is there because it's being shadow banned or pushed down the rabbit hole. And so people have to go to certain websites or certain search engines to find it. DuckDuckGo exists as an alternative search engine for that very purpose. You look at Brighteon, it exists as a YouTube alternative for that very purpose. There are certain ideas that don't necessarily go against the typical TOS that companies don't like because they often serve against their own political interest, or they are considered conspiracy thought, when in reality, they could actually be so profound that they're considered conspiracy, or so profound that it challenges everything that people believe that they have to backtrack, coming back to some sort of idea which they can't even conceive of. An example of this would be from the ex-KGB Soviet, Yuri Bezmenov, who actually called a process of brainwashing that happens for nations ideological subversion. And he said that through this brainwashing, you can present all the information in the world, but it won't be enough to actually change someone's mind.
Quite often in academia, there is a charismatic leader of a group. Charismatic people tend to get more students, they get more researchers under their umbrella to do research for them. They need to be charismatic and outgoing and friendly because that's how you attract people to your research group. However, quite often, and I've seen this, the most charismatic researchers tend to be ones that exploit their students the most. They use kind of shame and guilt and competitiveness to keep you working hard. Academia relies on people's passion and it exploits that passion to keep them in their research groups. For example, if you're passionate about a particular research field, you can find a supervisor who will happily take you in and exploit that passion for very little pay, for a lot of stress and anxiety over many years, but no one joins that part of it. They join it to explore their passion. You are the exception to the rule. The exception that you will be the one to be able to achieve academic supremacy and become a permanent tenured professor. But that is not the case. I have seen the numbers. They are not very good. And in my experience, very few people actually go on to become tenured professors. No one will tell you different because they love bomb you. They need you to believe that, so you will dedicate a lot of your time, effort, life, and even finances in getting there. When you go into a PhD and academia, no one actually says, actually, you know what, you could earn a lot more money with your skills in industry or somewhere else. A lot of the time, they are low-paying positions. Even after you get your PhD as a postdoc, particularly in the States, they are very, very uncompetitive wages, and also a lot of the funding that occurs during a PhD does not meet the living costs required to do a PhD full-time. So a lot of people end up having to get jobs, or at the worst end up paying for their PhD, which is something that no one should ever do, ever. Mind-numbing techniques are used to suppress doubts about the group and its leaders. Yeah, obviously. Have you ever been to an academic seminar? That is mind-numbing. There's certain sort of like very bad characteristics, narcissistic traits of certain supervisors. The group's leader is not accountable to any authorities. I think this one is true. The fact that academics are not held accountable for their actions, often because they are bringing in loads of money for the university, means they're not accountable really to anyone. If they continue to bring in money, continue bringing prestige papers and students to the university, they can get away with almost anything. You have to perform. And if you're not performing, it's your fault. To live and or socialize with other group members. Live, no, but socialize, yes. How many awkward tea room conversations have you been forced to have because it's someone's success that you need to celebrate?
So, okay, these are concerns that some people have. But has anyone in academia actually confronted any of these concerns? Have they talked about it?
Is academia a cult? I don't know. And honestly, I don't really care. I'm in it because I'm working with teachers and I'm doing research, and I get to work with teachers when I do the research, and I'm trying to understand education and make it better. I'm trying to be and live in a way that my teaching life thrives and survives, and I get to shape and be shaped by this community. Yes, there's things wrong with academia. I'm trying to work through it all. I mean, they're affording me time and space to read and write and work with teachers and teach a couple classes. And, you know, this is the way that it works. I'm getting paid. This is my job. You know, there's a lot of things that we can talk about there, but a cult, I don't know. For me, I'm just happy that I'm afforded the time and space, and I'm in a position that trusts me to do the research and do the teaching the way that I know is humanizing.
So I appreciate this perspective because it's willing to confront it, even if she just says, I don't know. And I think it might be worth knowing how cults operate, especially if people are claiming that maybe you're in one, because one of the hardest things about being in a cult is you don't see you're in a cult, and there's so much community support around that idea. I mean, she even said that she's shaped by the community, and that she has to work through it all, and that they are affording me, right? As if she's beholden to someone, and she says this is just the way it works. These are just some things to note on when it comes to language. But one thing that's really important that she mentioned is that she knows she's doing the teaching in a way that she knows is humanizing. And my only question is it really? Is it actually? Because again, we could be fooled into thinking we're doing something good when in reality it is bad. So it's just an open question. I'm not claiming she is or isn't. I am just presenting the information and sharing these questions for people like her and yourself to catch on to these habits and these patterns for more self-reflection. It's also worth mentioning that she's one teacher among many other teachers, and some teachers are unlikely to criticize other teachers because they're all working together in the same field, though they may have totally different strategies and may be even pushing fanatical worldviews. The critiques that we're sharing here are not on behalf of certain teachers or certain ideologies, but the system as a whole, and therefore when people participate in these systems, unfortunately, they can be grouped into it as part of the problem for not speaking up about it. And it's a rough kind of slippery slope because you don't want to blame this person. They're naive, they don't know, and they may not be causing any harm. But they're within a system that is maybe causing harm. And so there's an awareness to be made here that we should not group these individuals together, but we have to help them see the relationships that they have, just as we are becoming aware of the relationships we have.
I've dealt with this for a long time because I tried to expose academia. Nobody cared. And I was like, why does nobody care? And the most common responses I'd get when I would ask people, like, why is this not taking off? It was, nobody cares what happens in academia. Well, we spent 50 years not caring what happened in academia while it turned into cults. And now we send every one of our young people that we can to go get indoctrinated by a cult under the guise of being educated. Meanwhile, none of us even bother to look under the hood to see what's going on there. We just assumed everybody there was doing what they were supposed to. They weren't.
Ignorance is a key theme of cult behavior. For again, many people who escape cults said, if I knew what you told me, this person who's exposing me in this cult and saying to get out, that I wouldn't have joined in the first place. People are misled, they are deceived into these cults, and that's why they follow them. And then they start to adopt that behavior and they get themselves so deep into it, they don't know how to get out. I mean, if you are in academia, this is your job. If you are a student, you already invested. So there's no point to going outside those boundaries for so many reasons. But I think it's time we ask ourselves, what do we do if we are in academia, if we are a teacher, if we are in higher education?
You should continue to do the things you like outside of academia. And I know sometimes the group culture of academia and the research group that you're in means that you're in there on weekends because that's what the supervisor expects. But do not give in to that as much as you can. Continue to do the things you loved before your PhD in academia. Continue to do the things that connect you to your friends and family. And I think that will make for a much better career overall.
Well, doing what you love, that sounds a lot like unschooling. And if you ask me, it seems like this should just be applied to everything in life. But remember, doing what you love, just like anything else, could be taken to an extreme. And you could even be teaching everything that you want to teach, and you purposely aren't teaching the things that maybe are more uncomfortable, things that maybe ask more questions, because you don't want to think critically or really challenge the status quo. So maybe if you are in one circle or one system, you ask yourself, are there any alternatives? Not just, can I get myself out of it?
If you are in a graduate program right now, please know that your choice to pursue advanced degrees was an honorable thing. We need people with advanced degrees desperately to solve the urgent problems we're confronted with. No, you can do something else. You don't need institutional validation. You are already entrepreneurial. You have countless skills that you have mastered on your path. Your worth is not tied to either a degree or an institution or a particular career outcome. Prioritizing a livable income is an honorable choice. You are not becoming a monk. You do not need to take a vow of poverty. You can reclaim your own priorities vis-a-vis the cult, and some of those might include getting paid for your work, living in a place you love, not applying to academic jobs, and remembering that you are not alone. There is support, a lot of support out there.
What's interesting here is that she says we need degrees, but then she says we don't need institutional validation, and that your worth is not tied to your degree or your institution. And maybe you don't need to be a monk, but you also don't need to be a king. Maybe you could just be yourself. What is the point here of the degree? It just points to what you are, but you are the thing that an employer needs, right? Not the piece of paper. So perhaps there's another cult going on that involves identity.
Please ask this: who's teaching your classes, and where is your tuition money going? Because it's not going to the teaching faculty. And tell your legislators to adequately fund higher education. Ask that higher education is adequately funded at the state and federal level. And for all of you who are near the academic cult, you can reclaim your autonomy. You can decide to do something else. You can declare the freedom to move on.
Yeah, we should declare our autonomy and our freedom to move on from perhaps systems that don't serve us or that are not us. But if we want funding to go where we want it to go, why do we have compulsory education? We can ask the question that she asked, where is your money going, but apply that to the legislators. How are they going to fund education? Is there any coercion involved? Then perhaps there's something else to look at here. And what about their identity? Are they not to reclaim their autonomy from their institution? Or is that an exception because it's politics? Are they not considered among academia or tied to academia? There's a lot of questions here that we need to think about. And perhaps what we discussed here explains why some of the cult experts in our country are unwilling to talk about certain things, perhaps the big cults that Margaret Singer called, or the controversial topics that maybe they are also engaged in as cults. What if we have to question things much bigger than academia? Perhaps it is things that influence academia. Just as we say, there are teachers that influence the school system. How much bigger minded can we become to see these big cults that may be out there? How much are we willing to question all that is around us, the belief systems that we have that we don't see within ourselves? Well, when we mention the word cult, many people automatically think about certain things, and it's time we address it.